Welcome to muscle lecture number 4. This is our 6th video for the muscle unit, and this is all about chest and abs, and we'll be talking about, mostly we'll be talking about muscles of the abdomen, but we'll be talking about some of the chest too. So let's get started with pectoralis major. The origin points for pectoralis major are along the clavicle and along the sternum. Its insertion point is here on the humerus, and its action is to adduct the arm, so to bring that arm back to the body. Pectoralis major is probably more familiar to you as pecs, and it actually sits on top of its sister muscle, which is pectoralis minor. So here we have pectoralis major, and then underneath it, you would see pectoralis minor. Next, we have rectus abdominis. This is a really long and really kind of cool muscle. And you might be more familiar with it as the muscle that creates six-pack abs. So I'll talk about that in just a little bit. But I first want to talk about its origin point, which is down here on the pubis or the pubic symphysis. And that would seem kind of odd, but once you understand its action, that will make a little bit more sense. Its insertion point is here on the sternum and the xiphoid process, also on the rib here. You can just put sternum in your notes. That's fine with me. Then its action is to actually flex the spine. It's the one that allows you to bend at the waist. And there are lots of interesting things that happen with rectus abdominis. The first thing we'll talk about is six-pack abs. How you get six-pack abs is because of these little strips of connective tissue all throughout this big, long stretch of muscle. These little bands of connective tissue actually kind of pull against the muscle tissue, giving us that definition on the abs. And the only people that can get six-pack abs or even eight-pack abs are people who have a genetic mutation that actually limits the amount of connective tissue. Because on top of rectus abdominis is a huge aponeurosis. And you'll see that in our dissection on the cat. You'll see that big aponeurosis. And the only way to get six-pack abs is if that aponeurosis is so thin that you can see the muscle definition between these strips of connective tissue here. Some other interesting things about rectus abdominis is that women who get pregnant can sometimes have the two sides of their rectus abdominis split. So imagine that there's another rectus abdominis right here mirroring this one. And sometimes when you're pregnant and they have to do a C-section or sometimes just due to pregnancy, you can get tears along the connective tissue that hold the two sides together. So you can actually have, and that will never heal appropriately. And you'll just have these two separate sides. It will still be covered with skin, but it looks slightly different. It has a markedly different appearance. Let's talk about intercostals. We're going to only really talk about the external intercostals. There are also internal intercostals. The external intercostals, as you can see here, are all between your ribs. For the origin and insertion, instead of labeling each rib, you can just say ribs. That's fine. The action is to pull all these ribs together. So if you think about the origin being on the upper rib and the insertion being on the lower rib, then you can think of all of these ribs are going to get collapsed together. So what it does is it helps with inhalation. That's its action, to help squeeze the thoracic cavity, squeeze the lungs, expressing all of that exhalation to really squeeze out that air. And then, of course, to expand the rib cage a little bit, to rest and breathe in. So really the action here is to help with inhalation. There are internal intercostals as well. And you will see those a little bit when we look at the cat and also on the dummy. And they're just in layers, and they're all in the same place. They're not really in different places. Next muscle is serratus anterior. Serratus gets its name from this serrated appearance. It looks like a serrated knife, or kind of like a great white's mouth with its serrated teeth. Its origin is all along the ribs, and its insertion is here on the scapula. And its job is to protract the scapula. So if you want to bring your scapulas forward, if you kind of want to collapse your rib cage and bring your shoulders forward, your serratus anterior is going to help with that and bring those scapulas forward. So protraction of the scapula here on action. Now we're going to talk about your abdominal muscles. This is a muscle group. We're going to start with the external oblique muscle. All of your abdominal muscles are really huge, thin sheets of muscle. They're paper thin, but they have a really important job. And you can see here, you have your big external oblique, and it gets its name from these muscle fibers running at an angle here. So you can definitely see that. Its insertion points are down here on the iliac crest and on the pubis, and its origin points are all along the ribs and sternum. Its action is to compress the abdominal contents, so to compress the abdominal cavity. These are the muscles that are going to help you poop or give birth or urinate, the ones that are going to compress your abdominal contents. Then we have our internal oblique. Again, the insertion points down here on the iliac crest and on the pubis. Its origins up here on the rib cage really help to compress that abdominal cavity and the contents within. And then our final abdominal muscle is our transverse abdominis. Again, same origin and insertion points along the iliac crest and the pubis and along the ribs. Again, it compresses the abdominal contents. That's its action. These three are your abdominal muscles. And this is why rectus abdominis is not an abdominal muscle. It's not part of the abdominal muscle group because it does not have that same function, that same action. Its action is to bend the spine, to flex the spine, whereas our abdominal muscles, transverse abdominis, internal oblique, and external oblique, are all about compressing the abdominal cavity. That is the end of chest and abs. And we will be moving on to our next muscle group in our next